It's been 90 years since the Treaty of Versailles was signed. It was a peace deal at the end of World War I which ended the conflict between Germany and the Allied powers. The US refused to sign it but made its own treaty with Germany, and the legacy of that is still being felt today.
It was a peace without victory. After the most devastating war in history, the world's great powers gathered in Paris to create a new world order, and the first order of business was Germany. The primary loser in the war, Germany was never allowed to threaten its neighbors again. She was demilitarized, made to pay massive reparations, and importantly, made responsible for the war.
All of the Central Powers lost territory, and several new nations were created.
One day Germany would look for revenge, but what ultimately made the next war inevitable was the type of world system the Versailles Treaty made, as the Americans would abandon its own grand security project, the League of Nations, and thus made it unworkable. However, another idea sponsored by the Americans was the concept of self-determination for all nations. For the winners of the war, this idea was embraced. For the losers, it was a disaster, and for many of the people they once ruled. Poland was given a corridor to the sea through the German region of Prussia, splitting Germany into two. British global influence expanded greatly. The French received Syria and Lebanon. Japan acquired Germany's Pacific Islands. And in the end, China refused to sign. The Versailles system changed the world forever and remains in effect today, and it continues to falter.
Don't set up a system of alliances or a security system that you're not strong enough to maintain. If you're not strong enough to maintain it, then compromise, make deals accordingly. Now, that's something I think that we would have done well to remember, after the end of the Cold War, because the Americans in particular, but the Europeans too, committed themselves to all sorts of things in all sorts of places, and then discovered, of course, they weren't strong enough to push it through, and we're still living with the results.
Versailles lives on. When the strongest powers support a small nation's bid for statehood, they can openly ignore international law and world opinion. Kosovo was backed in its goal of independence from Serbia, even though it was illegal. At the same time, the new states of South Ossetia and Abkhazia are ignored. Also, when a country is deemed to have lost a conflict, it should totally submit to the victors. This happened when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991.
Russians interpret it as either a deal or, at best, as a surrender on terms. The Americans in particular, but many Europeans as well, saw it as like 1945, as unconditional surrender on the part of Russia, and tried to make a kind of almost Versailles-style peace at Russia's expense, which of course Russia, like Germany after 1919, was simply not prepared to live under.
The Treaty of Versailles was signed in the Hall of Mirrors. A mirror image of what went wrong at Versailles remains with us. International law should apply to all in equal measure. This settlement started out with great hopes, but its greatest weaknesses stay with us to this day. Peter Lavelle, RT, Moscow.